Patrick, you look at the weakness we've seen in the yuan, and there are still people out there saying that this is, if not, an outright devaluation, certainly something the PPOC aren't going to be trying very hard to fight as long as it stays above that certain level. Are we seeing more of a dollar strength story play out, or are there fundamental reasons why we're seeing the weakness in the Chinese currency?
Look, you touch on it there, and exactly, this is more a dollar story. If we look at where dollar China has traded year to date over the last 1 year, over the last 2 years, and we look at that against other G10 currency pairs, and dollar China is right in the middle of that. So I think the bulk of it is, the greatest influence has been the stronger dollar, to date. We do have some slowing in the Chinese economy, which has been, well telegraphed, has been well expected as China, continues its deleveraging effort. So I think it's tempting sometimes to say this is a China story, but, we don't believe it is dominated by that at all.
Well, that just brings us to the main question, right, which emerging markets, their fates are kind of tied to, which is what happens to the dollar from there. We've seen the natural combination of rising rates and the rising currency, and then even with the trade tensions that have started, arguably by the US, you're seeing that return to base effect. Is there any argument or expectation that the strength in the US dollar will not continue?
Well, at this stage, we just heard, earlier, we have seen the dollar come off a little bit, in the last 24 hours. But of course, that doesn't make the longer trend. But I think what we saw, clearly, or what we heard clearly from the Fed's beige book last night, that trade tensions are starting to have an impact on, on companies and districts' outlook. So if we see more of that, then I think the dollar strength that we've seen to date, which has been underpinned by some very strong growth, and the Q2 GDP growth will be strong, is likely to fade. We're talking about synchronous global growth. Well, most of the market believe that was the case in Q1. That didn't develop. Are we starting to see that now? We've just seen some trade numbers out of Japan early this morning. They were pretty good. It looks like now that the US risks, somewhat marginalising itself. And if we can get growth in global economy elsewhere, then certainly we expect the dollar to, to turn lower, and we expect emerging markets, particularly here in Asia, to do well.
Patrick, just today we saw the dollar come off just a little bit in U.S. trading, or at least not as much as we saw yesterday. Hop into the Bloomberg terminal, because I want to show you what's happening in terms of volatility in Asian FX. This is a 3-month implied volatility for Asian currencies in your GTV terminal. The question here is whether we're seeing this calm, something that's just temporary before any possible storm, and what might that catalyst be that investors should be wary of looking ahead?
Look, I think that's an interesting chart, and I've seen the similar myself, and we look at that very clearly, but I think what we're seeing there is other emerging markets, particularly in Latin America and in Central Europe and Africa, have other influences going on. They have political uncertainty. They have a lot greater economic uncertainty as well than we do have here in Asia. So I see a situation where that divergence can extend for some time yet. I don't see that volatility in Asian emerging markets should go to match the volatility in emerging markets more generally.
All right. Over the past few days, Patrick, we've also been taking a look at the yen in terms of its weakness. It's near its weakest point ever since the past 6 months or so, since the beginning of this year. Do we really expect that to continue moving ahead as long as dollar strength continues? I mean, just today, of course, we just got some export numbers that really did see some buying into the yen.
That's right. The export numbers were good, as we were mentioning earlier. Look, I think for dollar yen to go sustainably higher from here, we'd have to see the dollar sustainably stronger, and that's not what we're forecasting. Certainly, the yen has been a little bit weak, on a risk appetite basis in the last couple of weeks, but around 113, we're starting to see some resistance to weaker levels in the yen, and I think, as we mentioned about the dollar perhaps tracking a little bit lower than here, then the yen will underperform against the dollar, but perhaps underperform against other risk currencies as the dollar weakens.